We good? All right, today we're going to talk about spouts, specifically how to pull a spout. There are other ways to make a spout, such as cutting it back, which is this type of spout. This one was done in a combination of using a tool to slice as well as pull to get this spout effect. This spout and this spout here are just pulled. And the way that that is done is with wet fingers moving on the clay. There are a couple aspects to consider. There is the angle that the spout comes to. If your angle comes over a lot, like this way, it's not going to pour well because it's just going to kind of go back onto itself. So you want to consider this angle as something that you actually want going straight up as much as possible and only very slightly angled outward. You do want to pull up a little bit on the two sides right adjacent to it so that it can control the flow of water. The sharper your edge is, the better the water is going to cut off when you're done pouring. So you'll pour, and the sharper it is, the more it cuts off when you're done pouring. But when you make it too sharp, it's also more likely that it's going to chip in use. So you want to find a balance between sharpness and smoothness that's going to still pour crisply, but which will not chip at any point. And this is just another example of that, a little bit more subtle. So I've got a couple of forms here, and the way that we're going to begin is with wet fingers. I'm going to just find my place. Now I want to choose the part that's highest if there is any asymmetry. That would be a good way to kind of camouflage it. So I'm going to start off by just making some upward pulls with 2 fingers. And I'm just trying to get a little height and keep the edge pretty sharp. You want to be fluid in your movements, going just as straight up as you can, making sure that it's kept moist. Okay, so I think that's just about enough there. Now, I'm going to wet my fingers and do the 2 edges. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up on the 2 sides just adjacent, and I find it's helpful to do it with 2 hands at once because I'm more likely to have made the same motion that way than if I just did one at a time. So hopefully that will result in this edge being slightly raised and an attractive result. So I'm pretty satisfied with the sharpness of that edge. Stylistically, I think I still kind of want to mess with it. So now I'm going to come back in with a wet finger and just smooth my edges to the best of my ability. This is good enough for now, really. I'm going to just do a little shape there. And when this is leather hard, I can clean it up with a sponge. I don't want to try to clean it up now because what I'm going to end up doing is just mushing the whole thing. So that's one example. Another example, I can show you more of that combination that we were talking about. So I'm just going to grab a tool real quick. So one way that I can do this is I can do a combination like this one, where I pull partially and I cut the rest. So I'm going to start with the pulled part. So once again, I'm going to get my wet fingers. And I actually do think I have a higher side here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just do a little pull up on that. And remember, I'm prioritizing keeping it fairly straight up and angled only slightly out, because if I angle it too far out, it's not going to want to pour well. It's going to want to dribble back on itself. So I've got that pretty well there. And I might just drag a finger across to create sharpness. And then I'm going to come on my 2 sides again. And I'm going to do a little upward, creating a little bit of a snoot. I think of spouts kind of like noses or like a beak on a bird. Okay, so I'm just bringing up my edges, kind of settling on a fairly subtle shape. It doesn't have to be dramatic. You could go like this, but it's actually not going to pour any better than if it were like this, really. So I'm going to be satisfied with that as my initial aspect. And now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to come in, and I highly recommend tracing a line before you commit. Usually I would wait until the almost leather hard stage to do the rest of this because I'd get more control, but for the sake of the demo, I will go ahead and just show you now. So I'm going to go ahead and trace a line that comes down a bit. And what I like to do is cut the first part of my line to exactly about the middle. So I've actually just made a cut down directly across from where my spout is. And I like to cut my first side. And once again, I would do this when it's a little firmer so it wouldn't be as mushy, but I don't really care. Okay, and I'm going to cut that off. And I can actually take that piece and trace it onto the other side. So I'm actually sticking that on because I'm doing it really wet. You can also sort of use a piece as a template like this when you do it when it's leather hard, because you can just like break that part and not worry about it too much. So I just traced it there. And now I'm going to go ahead and give it a cut. Not quite perfect because I'm doing it at the wet stage, but then I can just come back in and clean up the transition. And I can finish fixing that up when it's leather hard. And when it's leather hard, I would definitely come in and sponge it and clean it up as you would any piece of pottery. And that's a few approaches to spouts.